Good evening once again on this day, 1194 of the Trump administration. 190 days to go now until the presidential election. And perhaps you're old enough to remember when this president swore off the daily format of coronavirus press conferences, saying they were no longer worth his time, mostly because of the global reaction after he said this.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
So that was Thursday. The president swore off the daily briefings for an entire weekend after the idea of injectable disinfectants failed to catch on. Tonight, in what veteran White House aide David Gergen called a form of addiction, the president was back at it, this time in the Rose Garden. Today, with 56,000 dead and 26 million unemployed, the president faced the news media again. He said things are moving along, and there's a tremendous energy in this country right now. He also said he couldn't imagine why people would ingest disinfectants. Today, a parade of CEOs came before the microphone, most of whom have learned the name of the game by now and thanked the president for his leadership. He's going deep on blaming China, saying today, quote, "We are not happy with China." He said one country is accountable for what happened, and it could have been stopped, and those who have died have, quote, "sacrificed for incompetence." He again mentioned, quote, "I built the greatest economy in the history of the world." He again mentioned shutting down, quote, "causes death also." And he again mentioned the 1917 flu pandemic, which is what he calls the 1918 flu pandemic, and issued his daily reminder of the death toll estimate had he done nothing. He said, quote, "We've lost a lot of people," while noting U.S. deaths may be headed now for 70,000. Tonight, we widen back out to the real world and find a U.S. death toll that has passed 56,000, with not yet 2% of our population tested. We know of nearly 1 million confirmed cases of this coronavirus. That's against the backdrop of more than 3 million cases worldwide. Tonight, the Washington Post is reporting Trump's intelligence briefing book cited the virus threat on multiple occasions as far back as January and February. One of the reporters on the story spoke to our colleague Chris Hayes earlier this evening.
References to the coronavirus were included in at least a dozen of the president's daily briefs. They were calling attention to the threat of the coronavirus in a way that amounts to a fairly steady drumbeat throughout January and February. He doesn't read the PDB, unlike his predecessors. He relies almost exclusively on an oral briefing that he has curtailed to roughly 2 or 3 times a week. Across this stretch of time, of course, he is, in January and February, the period of time we're writing about, he is very dismissive of the threat of this virus.
You may recall it was about a month ago that Donald Trump said this.
Nobody could have ever seen something like this coming, but now we know, and we know it can happen and happen again. And if it does, somebody's going to be very well prepared because of what we've learned and how we've done.
As we mentioned, the president appeared in the Rose Garden today to announce a new plan to increase resources for testing. Yet the upshot of all of it was that testing is still going to be the job of the states. The White House says it will be coordinating with governors to support testing plans. Today, the administration was asked about its previous statements vowing to boost testing.
In early March, you said we'd be at 4 million tests by the following week. We're just now got there in the last few days. So what have you learned about what went wrong, a month and a half or over the last month and a half or 2 months, and what's going to go right now?
John, I appreciate the question, but it represents a misunderstanding. on your part and frankly, a lot of people in the public's part about the difference between having a test versus the ability to actually process the test.
So when you said 4 million tests 7 weeks ago, you were just talking about tests being sent out, not actually being completed? I'm a little confused.
John, I think they're precisely correct. Those were tests that, frankly, but for the president's leadership, we'd still be waiting on those tests to be done in many cases.
I think it's very important to know, and this you can get from any other country, I think, if they're being honest. Not only do we have the most testing in the world by far, but we have by far the best testing.
Except for percentage of the population. Meanwhile, more states and cities are moving ahead with plans to start reopening their economies and lifting those stay-at-home restrictions. After weeks of shutdown, about 10 states have partially reopened. Texas, which, let's not forget, is home to 29 million Americans, will lift its stay-at-home order on Thursday of this week. Some businesses will be allowed to open back up Friday. Miami-Dade County down in Florida will reopen parks, boating facilities, waterways, golf courses starting Wednesday. Illinois now facing a court challenge to its order to extend the restrictions. A judge has ruled against the governor there, Governor Pritzker, issuing a restraining order over the extension of the state's stay-at-home order through May 30. Pritzker says he'll fight to keep his order in place. A number of school systems remain closed. This afternoon, the president sure seemed to urge governors to consider reopening schools for the remainder of the year.
I know that there are some governors that aren't necessarily ready to open up their states, but they may be ready to open up their school systems. We'll see, but that's their choice. But the word is safety, okay? Rapid, but safety.
U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr has alerted federal prosecutors to be on the lookout for state and local virus restrictions that could be violating the constitutional rights and civil liberties of his fellow citizens. At the White House, Trump offered this explanation of his AG's thinking.
He wants to see people get back and wants to see people get back to work. He doesn't want people to be held up when there's no reason for doing it. In some cases, perhaps it's too strict. He wants to make sure people have their rights and they maintain their rights. This has been a big study. The fact that people aren't allowed to have their freedom causes a tremendous amount of problems, including death. So that's what he's talking about.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.